Hello, this is Jasmine, and this is a tutorial for drawing and coloring a wolf in profile. This piece is going to be created digitally, but the basics can be carried through to any medium, and the way that I color will work for any opaque medium where you can layer solid colors on top of each other, but you may have to blend quickly before your medium dries. I start off with a dark blue color, and on a sketch layer I draw a rough circle that I section into quadrants. Adding a wedge shape to the top right quadrant gives me the basics of the cranium. For the muzzle, I make a tapered cylinder shape by connecting two very thin ovals. It's about 2/3 of the length of our initial circle, but I cut off the bottom of the cylinder and add another small one just below it and slightly farther back. If you think of where this lower cylinder meets the upper as a hinge, then you can easily draw this wolf with its mouth open instead of closed. Dividing the first quadrant in half vertically and marking the middle point gives you a guide for where to place the eye. I start with a circle, working it into a rounded triangle shape. The lower lid will usually have a more curve to it, and then I mark the skin of the inner eye with another triangle kind of shape. A line down from the center of our initial circle to mark where the mouth will end. The base of the ear sits in the upper right quadrant and gently curves up into an almost teardrop shape. Remember that the ear in this position will lean slightly forward, so the front is much more vertical than the back. The second ear is easier to place. For the neck of a very fluffy wolf like this, you'll want to make sure not to place your guidelines too low on the skull or too far back from the jaw, but this area can vary from wolf to wolf. Now I make a new layer for a refined sketch, where I lay in basic details and rough strokes as a guideline for what the fur is doing. The nose of the wolf has a specific shape that's difficult to describe, so I recommend looking up references there especially. And the upper lip curves gently down from our initial cylinder shape. Also keep in mind the direction that the fur of the ear is going, curving inward from the edges. The first strokes that you see me laying along the wolf's body represent areas of shadow where thick fur has created parts. This covers the guidelines for drawing a wolf in profile by breaking it down into simple shapes. At this stage you can get as detailed as you like, but since I'm going to be adding color to this, I'll leave it simple. Underneath the refined sketch, I create a base coat layer, and using a hard round brush, I fill the wolf in with a medium desaturated brown. Locking this layer, I bring my brush opacity down to 27, and I start blocking in the colors of my wolf. I make sure to get good color variation, but I don't try to refine anything yet. Wolves often have light faces and underbelly, as well as a pale undercoat, so I make sure to work this color throughout the image so that it'll show up through some of the darker markings. Wolves also frequently have a lot of brown around their ears. To get the ticked black markings correct, I made sure to leave some cream color showing through between the darker strokes. After I'm happy with that, I add a new layer for shadows, but it's actually simply for darks, not only areas of shadow. I use my refined sketch as a guide to figure out where shapes are and where the fur parts, and then I hide that layer. I use the shadow layer to build up my darks, laying in the fur patterns and working my way darker until I have a decent amount of contrast and detail, but I never use solid black in my coloring here. The next area is for highlights or lighter areas, and now that ticked pattern will really start to show through as I lay a light cream color down. I use a light hand to get thinner strokes and make sure to overlap some of the dark areas, but not all of them. Keep the direction of your fur in mind and work your way lighter. I don't go all the way white here, just like with the darks I didn't use solid black. I use a bright rusty color to bring out more of the brown back into the wolf's coat, but I use it sparingly as I don't want to obliterate all the highlights that I just made. When painting, I typically use a glaze to get this effect. Don't worry that the fur isn't very smooth at this point. Now I add a detail layer and I zoom in to really polish things up, starting with redefining the shape of the nose that got a little lost in all of that shadow. At this point, you can make the image as smooth as you would like by using the color picker where one stroke overlaps another and softening the edges with this new color. And you can do this continuously until you get a nice blended look. For this piece, I felt that only the fur around the nose and the face really needed this treatment. The face of this wolf underwent a lot of recoloring as I couldn't decide what type of markings I wanted to give it. For the eye, I simply used the same brush and blended some golden and orange colors, then redefined the pupil. On this detail layer, I also add a lot of small, near white hairs with my brush at a higher opacity. These hairs are most concentrated with the whiskers and the inner ears, but I place them sparingly throughout the whole body. Finally, I'm almost done. I go back to the shadows and highlight layers, and with a very low opacity of 5%, I darken the creases in the fur and I add some more highlight to the cream areas. Before I finish up though, I change the face pattern one last time. I'm using the color picker method to change the fur around the eyes and add some final details. That's it for the wolf. I used only the hard round brush and varying opacities to make it easier to follow. You could also do all of this on one layer if you wanted to. Now I'm adding effects like mist by using the Gaussian blur filter and a pale color, and then I add some snow with the same brush I've been using, just dabbing it on here and there with medium opacity, signature, and then finally the last thing I do is add a layer set to overlay and change the color to blue. Well, that's it. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you did, feel free to like and subscribe. And if you have any suggestions for other tutorials, please let me know.